Right.
Good
We
morning.
are back. It is unfortunately the morning.
I'll make Tiffany a morning person, everyone. Just wait. No, I'm just kidding.
Maybe with
Um,
enough caffeine or some sort of
well,
enhancer.
with enough caffeine, anything's possible, right?
This
Um,
is true.
um, well, today we have on the agenda to talk a little bit more about obviously trauma, but we are going to talk a little bit more today about attachment styles, what they are, and maybe how they can show up uh, in relationships or situations. So I don't know, Tiffany, if you have anything you'd like to get us started with.
No, I just kind of wanted to remind people this is for informational purposes. We're not trying to diagnose you on any particular attachment style. We're just here to help explore how trauma, specifically developmental trauma, can influence how we relate to others, how our nervous system responds to that connection, and why these patterns can show up.
Well, so maybe worth kind of getting out attachment styles are a quick little summary are internal templates for relationships developed in childhood based on how caregivers respond to our needs. There are four main attachment types: secure, anxious, avoidant, and disorganized. So we're going to talk a little bit more about each. So first, secure attachment would be comfortable with closeness and autonomy, trusting others, communicates needs clearly. An example could be a securely attached adult feels okay expressing disappointment to their partner and trusts it won't end the relationship. This is formed when a child receives consistency, comfort, safety, and validation from caregivers.
Yes.
Anything on secure attachment, Tiffany, you would like to throw in?
um, so usually the core experience that this attachment houses is that others are responsive, I can rely on connection. The world is generally a safe space. You tend to have pretty balanced amygdala activity. Threats are appropriately detected and not overinterpreted. You don't go into like hyper vigilance or anything of that nature. Um, these individuals tend to have a strong vagal tone, which just means that they can easily support calm regulation and social engagement. Um, they do have a robust oxytocin system, which is just your neurotransmitter system that encourages bonding, empathy, and trust. And the prefrontal cortex tends to be very well integrated with the limbic system, which helps support emotional regulation, empathy, and that impulse control. Um, some prime developmental factors that can help these brain patterns is caregivers being consistently emotionally attuned, responsive, and safe, and infants experiencing co-regulations that can help develop internal self-regulation systems. Overall, the outcome of having a secure attachment, these people's nervous system tends to be flexible, adaptable, and able to tolerate distress without shutting down or becoming overwhelmed by a stimulus.
Wow. Tiffany, do you have any advice for someone that maybe is hearing some of these things and realizing that they're in one of those attachment styles?
I think the biggest thing is to remember that, like, just because you have one of these attachment styles, it doesn't have to define you. Like you can still we have neuroplasticity. We can still rewire our brain to help kind of combat some of these styles if we have some that like compete with how we want to interact with the world. Um, I think that's the coolest thing about our brain is like the neuroplasticity allows us to be able to retrain it and relearn things in a way that still can be beneficial and not detrimental, as long as we choose not to stay in those unhealthy, like learned brain patterns.
I like it. Well, one of the other attachment styles that I think can be really relevant to some of our listeners would be the disorganized attachment style. So this person desires closeness but fears it. They struggle with trust, pushes others away while craving connection. Example, a person might become intensely affectionate, then suddenly accuse their partner of trying to hurt or betray them. This is formed when a child experiences trauma from the same person they depend on for safety, often through abuse or exposure to frightening situations. So it's disorganized because that person sometimes is there, and sometimes they're not. It's not something that one maybe realizes. I mean, all of these, you may not realize this is your attachment style until you're um, directly involved. Um, But I don't know, Tiffany, anything off of the disorganized attachment style that you would find interesting?
Yeah. This one I sometimes hear it called the fearful avoidant attachment style. That kind of core experience of I want closeness, but closeness also feels dangerous. Um, so oftentimes we'll see extremely dysregulated amygdala, um, where people's brains will perceive both connection and isolation as threatening, keeping them in that like disorganized kind of brain pattern. Um, the disorganized HPA axis response can be erratic, so meaning how people respond to stress um, can be erratic. You can often be stuck in that flight, fright, or freeze cycle and be unable to like get out of that pattern. There tends to be a low hippocampal volume, which is very common in trauma, and it just means you have a difficulty creating a coherent sense of time and self. Um, and with this one, I do wanna just say, like, not to be confused with other, like, brain disorders and, like, some neurodivergent factors that, like, people sometimes can struggle with time quite often. Um, Poor integration of your prefrontal cortex within your limbic system, which just basically means it can be hard to make sense of your emotions or even to understand them or to even regulate the behavior that comes with them. Um, and sometimes your, uh, you know, default network is often disrupted, which just means you can have alterations in self narrative and identity integration when you're experiencing that type of attachment style. Some of those developmental factors can look like having caregivers that were consistently fighting, they were abusive, they were very unpredictable. They create that like unstable, uncertain environment. Um, Oftentimes, child experiences caregiver as both safe and a source of fear, which kind of creates those two parallels of for a person's brain and not knowing like is connection safe, is isolation safe, what if anything is safe. And it's often, but not always, associated with very early childhood trauma, neglect, and loss. Um, More often than not, like what's happening is your nervous system is flipping between hyper and hypoarousal, and there's no consistent strategy for getting needs met. Instead, like survival just is dependent upon chaotic adaptations to daily life.
Wow. And then I do think you're onto something with just the survival strategy here, Tiffany. People are trying to survive different things and get on the other side of what they're going through. And so it's not something that people are choosing, I would say. I mean, I hope people kind of can well, maybe if they don't understand anything else, that like, you're not choosing like, oh, I have this anxious attachment or oh, I have avoidant attachment. Like you're going through something. It's a response to a stressor, a trauma, and situations that you're not able to manage otherwise.
Yes, this isn't a choice. You guys don't get to choose your attachment styles, unfortunately. But you do get to choose, like, if you let them impact your life. Once you're aware of them, that is. Let me, once you're aware of them, you might not be aware you have an attachment style that is impacting your life.
Huh. Well, and so we've talked a little bit about some of this today, Tiffany, but just talking about like how it's shaped is neglect. So no one coming when you cry. Abuse, the person who's supposed to protect you caused you harm. A loss or separation, losing a parent to death, incarceration, maybe abandonment, witnessing violence or substance use, like a parent being under the influence, severely impaired, enraged, or harmed, or just emotional inconsistency. So a caregiver was loving one day, cold or scary the next. We don't promote stigma of mental health disorders at all. And at the same time, like there are some severe mental illnesses that can have some challenges with showing up with like these emotional ups and downs and inconsistency and how that impacts children. So that is one thing I would say that I have worked with, and Tiffany, I think you have as well, of like we're working on how to manage some of those mental health symptoms and be a safe caregiver for children.
Hmm. And it's hard. That is one thing I want to point out. Like, and some parents might not agree with me on this, and that's totally fine. But like at some point, like even if you're doing your best to be the absolute best caregiver, you're going to fuck up. You're raising a
Yep.
generation that's different than your own generation. There will be differences. You will unintentionally fuck up. Like that's going to happen. And just recognize as like parents can only do so much and only be so good of a parents due to that constant ongoing generational changes of how people's brains just perceive things differently as we're progressing through life.
I agree. And yeah, this definitely something I talk a lot about with my clients. Like we do fuck up, we do make mistakes. And so it's not about, hey, don't make any mistakes, but more about how can you learn from those mistakes? How can you grow from them? How can you understand yourself better? Um, and so I think there's some challenges that can just come with judgment. So, mistakes happen. And so maybe just to that point, Tiffany, when we're talking about trauma and these things impacting attachment styles, like we are talking about a lot of different things. And so when we're talking about those, we're talking about many, many instances over years or, severe trauma. We're not talking about being a little short one time or every few weeks. So just want to make sure uh, we're not shaming any parents today.
Yeah, and that is not my goal at all. Like a lot of parents work really hard, and it's just unfortunately the nature of the beast of parenting.
It is.
Yeah, like
Well, yeah, go ahead.
I was just saying, I could almost place money that like at some point in time I'm gonna have a kid and they're gonna come to me and be like, "You fucked me up because of this," and I'd be like, "I didn't know."
I mean, it is the classic, one of the therapy cliches, right? Is like you go try to screw up your kid's last, or you go to work through what I mean, I think we all make mistakes. There's no perfect parents, and so I think it is a challenging thing experience for a lot of people. Just
Mm.
having um parenting and trying to be the best version of themselves that they can be. Um, but I also think just talking about some examples of maybe how this can play out, is if, trust becomes a dangerous thing when some of these dysfunctional attachment styles are at play. And so if you're not able to trust or feel safe, that's when we're going to find other survival strategies to feel safe, to manage some of that fear that comes from our brain when we're feeling unsafe in a lot of different situations. So there are probably going to be some maladaptive ways that people try to work at to feel safe, like getting attention in other places. So acting out at school so that you are getting maybe some of that supportive space to reflect. I mean, I don't think any child really knows too much that that's what they're doing, but I think at some point maybe they do start to realize that they are reaching out for help at the older they get and doing that maybe more intentionally.
Yeah. It can be fascinating how sometimes children's brains just know.
Yeah, I mean, if it's like a survival instinct, it's a human instinct. People don't always know um, how they're doing that. So I think it's something where it can feel very overwhelming, but if there wasn't a purpose that these survival strategies offered, um, they wouldn't be utilized in the first place.
Right. They work. Even if they're maladaptive, if they work, we're going to use them.
Exactly. I know, Tiffany, you're our neuroscience expert here. Is there anything that you want to share or uh, on the neuroscience side of things?
Um, with the last two attachment styles, or
Really, just on anything, if there's any part of the science you wanted to discuss.
I don't have general science. I do have some fun blurbs about avoidant attachment and anxious attachment when we get there.
Okay, why don't we go to anxious attachment?
Okay. So, anxious attachment. Generally the core experience that people tend to have with this type of attachment style is I need closeness to feel safe, but I fear you'll reject or leave me if I do get close. Some of the neurobiological patterns that tend to show up there is a hyperactive amygdala, which means you're constantly scanning for signs of abandonment or threat. You can have a lower prefrontal cortex regulation, which just means you have difficulty calming down after an emotionally arousing event. You can have elevated cortisol and norepinephrine, which just means, unfortunately, you're potentially in a chronic state of stress reactivity. Um, and you can have oxytocin dysregulation, which means you may bond quickly, but struggle to sustain trust with friends and other people that you meet and come across. Um, developmental factors that contribute to this attachment style is inconsistent caregiving. So emotional needs are met in an unpredictable manner. Um, Child often remains in a heightened state of vigilance and seeks proximity to manage internal distress, but not necessarily that closeness. Overall, this tends to put a person's nervous system in hyperarousal, which means emotional states feel more intense and they're harder to regulate without some form of reassurance.
How do you see this with your um, clients, Tiffany? Maybe someone who's coming in and they're coming in with a little bit more of that anxious presentation.
This one is gonna be like, honestly, I probably see this one a lot. But helping people recognize like you can be close to people, um, and you don't have to necessarily fear that rejection. Like you can be fearful of it, but you don't have to live in that state. And kind of helping them find and create a toolbox of tools that help them counteract that hyper arousal. So when they are feeling hyper aroused, they can ground themselves and really like slow down and be present with like what's happening, which I know sometimes is super easy for us therapists to spout off about, a lot harder sometimes for people to implement. But it will like it's an ongoing conversation with yourself of like, oh, I noticed I was dysregulated when, like, I stubbed my toe. What was really happening? And really being able to, like, garner a better relationship with yourself and your emotions so that you can understand what's going on, which is a lot of work. It's a lot of emotionally exhausting, physically exhausting work. Um, but being able to be aware of what's going on, like, with your nervous system can help you, like, calm it down. I think the metaphor I always use with people is if there's a stray cat or a stray dog that's outside your house, You wouldn't like just randomly try to approach it and pet it. You probably get bitten or scratched or some other thing. You have to start with like leaving food out and like letting it build trust and then like, sitting by it as it eats and like slowly building that relationship so that it can trust you. And it's very similar to like with your own nervous system. Like you're not just going to be able to snap your fingers and be like, "Oh, I trust myself now." You have to like slowly allow yourself to rebuild a trust system from the ground up so that you can trust yourself and be more confident, with what you're doing and how you're emotionally regulating and the people you choose to emotionally regulate with.
This is great advice, Tiffany. I like everything you're putting out today. I feel like it's very helpful.
I'm trying. I tried to do like an extra shot of caffeine so my brain was a little bit more awake.
I I feel like where everyone's gonna be like, wow, is Tiffany a morning person? What's going on? No, I'm just kidding.
Not definitely not a morning person.
You
Take a
just never know, right?
maybe one day, but I doubt it. My brain just it loves its sleep.
It's always something, isn't it?
This is true.
Um, well, I know we've got one more attachment style to maybe give our overview on, Tiffany. Anything we'd like to maybe share for this last one?
Oh, the last one is avoidant dismissive attachment, and this one I like could be wrong because I can't say that I actually took the time to look up any stats or numbers, but I feel like this one is pretty prominent, that avoidant dismissive attachment style, where people tend to have a core experience of I can't rely on others, I have to stay self-sufficient on my own to stay safe. Um, and oftentimes we can see a blunted amygdala in social emotional contexts. So you suppress your awareness of emotional distress, kind of like shove all your emotions in a box. They can have reduced vagal turn, which just means you have a limited parasympathetic activation for co-regulation. That system just doesn't activate as well as we would want it to. Um, you can have a higher dorsal vagal activity, which means you can end up having emotional numbness, disengagement, or you can get stuck in that freeze mode. And oftentimes there's a low oxytocin response, which just means there's a reduced neurochemical reward from being close to people or having intimacy with the people around you. Um, some developmental factors that play into that is caregivers were emotionally distant, extremely critical, and often rejecting. Children learn very quickly to deactivate that attachment system and minimize emotional needs of themselves to kind of like adapt and fit into that environment, which often leads to the majority outcome, not the only outcome, of nervous system being stuck in hypoarousal and recognizing and kind of adapting to and surviving with disconnection is protective. Emotional suppression is the way to survive, and really kind of creating like a dissociative kind of experience, like from your own emotions and from like connection itself.
These are some, I mean, it's just all of it's heavy, but it's like I know these are some sadder things for us to kind of discuss at length.
Yeah, they like it's interesting that you see a lot of people like post on social media about like attachment styles and knowing your attachment styles can like help you do all of these things. And it's like there's also this shady, like gray, sad area that's a part of like learning your attachment style, of like recognizing like, oh, I might not have had like the best environment growing up, and like this sucks that like I have to deal with all of these outcomes that like I had no choice in.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, really, kind of some of the other stuff I have prepped, Tiffany, is like noticing it as an adult. So I don't want to shift us out of this if there's anything else you had, but that's kind of more of what I looked into.
Yeah, that actually works perfectly because attachment work isn't just psychological, it's also physiological. It requires engaging the body, not just the thoughts, and with like co-regulation, somatic practices, and safe relational experiences to help rewire ingrained patterns, which you can take us away and kind of talk about some of that and how it works.
Yeah, the physical part or just the examples in day-to-day life? Sorry.
I'm gonna let you do both.
Oh, okay. That's nice of you.
Or you can always throw it back.
No, it's okay. It's tennis sometimes. So on the physical side, we have cortisol and adrenaline that will obviously be released when we're going through stressful experiences or responding to stressful experiences. So prolonged trauma is going to lead to chronic stress hormone release, making the brain more reactive and mistrustful. It just means that there is more reactivity to a lot of different things. And also neuroplasticity. The brain can rewire, but it requires safety, repetition, and emotional attunement. So without that safety, whether that's in therapy or in other situations, it's going to be very difficult to rewire and heal. Um, and one of the other things I really more talk about, would be examples of trauma, showing up in adulthood. That's more my wheelhouse than the physical and neuroscience end of things. But talking about just dating. So someone with an anxious attachment in a dating relationship may really fall pretty quickly in love, may text back very quickly, may need a lot of reassurance that things are going well or okay. And maybe that's energy comes off as someone feeling very like nervous or uncomfortable on a date. Someone maybe with avoidant attachment may just ghost people. We've talked about that on mic before about just ghosting, just not responding, not dealing with different things, keeping secrets, or feeling very overwhelmed by intimacy.
I know I'm being a child. I'm raising my hand.
That's okay.
um, I did want to say something that came up in my brain as you're talking about ghosting is that not to not to give advice or anything, but like if you're aware of your attachment style and like you have one of these that know that can impact like relationships and how you view relationships with others, being very, very cautious with dating apps as like since that's the major place ghosting can occur and like kind of unintentionally like revamping and re-traumatizing yourself through those types of experiences. Because I've seen that a lot and I'm just like, this is just like I don't know if there's a healthy way to go about like dealing with some of these attachment styles like on dating platforms because people can be harsh.
I like what you're saying. I do. I do. I like what you're saying. I think it can be very challenging to stay grounded, stay open to being grounded on some of these different situations, and I think that can also be really overwhelming. So yeah, I think there's a lot of stress that can come in, and so a great suggestion I have heard by some of my esteemed sex therapist and couples therapist colleagues is just getting on those apps when you're open to grounding or connecting and trying to stay there for 10 to 15 minutes, and then after that, logging out, and not feeling like you have to stay on there, too much where it's overwhelming. One of the other things to talk about is maybe for someone with a disorganized attachment with dating would be individuals having volatile relationship cycles, very loving 1 minute, fleeing the next. Some other examples for friendship would be anxiously attached people feeling devastated by a missed hangout or unreturned call. An avoidant attachment person might be a lone wolf who doesn't really get with friends or get too close. And a person with disorganized attachment may have a history of toxic friendships or relationships. And the last category and last thing I have for us today would be talking about workplace relationships. A person with an anxious attachment may overextend to please a supervisor. A person with an avoidant attachment may struggle with collaboration or feedback. And a person with disorganized attachment may have performance highs and lows linked to emotional regulation and challenges.
Yeah. I think it's crazy hearing you talk about it going and just processing all of the ways that these attachment styles can show up in our lives, not just in intimate relationships, but like in the workplace, like in our job as well.
It's interesting how it can show up in many different ways.
Yeah. It can be, I don't know, having one of those like, I'm impressed with the brain and how the brain can choose to help us interact with like everyone throughout our life, whether it be adaptive and or maladaptive.
That's a really good point. My final maybe takeaway on attachment styles is that they're not flaws, they're survival blueprints. Once you understand the map, you can find a new route. So we're not trying to bring judgment for anyone, but we do hope if you're listening, perhaps you're able to understand yourself, your partner, or something else related to understanding how to support someone else's traumatic experiences.
Hmm. Yeah. Uh, Last couple blurbs that I kind of had is that our brains can change, especially in safe, attuned relationships due to our neuroplasticity. A therapeutic alliance can help with corrective emotional experiences. Um, and you can relearn different styles. You can relearn like your attachment style. Um, Healing ultimately starts when we stop blaming ourselves for our survival strategies and start listening to what they've been trying to help protect us from. Attachment styles are not diagnoses, they're adaptive patterns that we've learned to survive to whatever point we are in our life. When we look at them through a trauma informed lens, we gain compassion, clarity, and a path forward and understanding. You're not broken. Your attachment style is part of your growth journey, and that is okay. Kind of my like blurb.
Oh, I like it. Um, it's really, yeah, I think that's really helpful.
Yeah. So that's all that I have today on the brain and attachment styles. Eric, do you have any last minute
No,
quips?
I thank everyone for listening, and I hope that you will, if you are listening, you'll check out our Patreon and see what we have there. There's some really cool resources that we have been sharing, collecting, and posting. So if anybody is looking for some ways to connect with us outside of the episodes, that would be a great place to go.
Yeah. Until next time, guys.